Okay, so today I'm here with Andrew Walker and Josh Morrison, and we'll be talking a bit about alternative legal service providers and specifically about a company called Axiom. So I'm going to give a brief overview of ALSPs to start off, and then we'll be able to dive into some more specific questions about one of these providers, Axiom specifically. So ALSPs are companies that exist within a broader legal market, and they focus on, delivering legal services in a non-traditional way. And they're often seen as a source of specialized expertise and incorporate more technology to their solutions than perhaps the traditional law firm. So there are a wide variety of ALSPs, and they're often grouped into 5 main categories, which include document review, e-discovery, IP management, contract lifecycle management, and on-demand legal services or flexible legal staffing. So for this session, we are going to focus on the last category of on-demand legal services and discuss this space with Andrew Walker, who is an expert in this area. He started his career as a corporate lawyer in Toronto, and then has since moved into a senior management role at Axiom, which is a global leader in on-demand legal services. So with that, I would like to introduce Andrew. So hi, thanks for joining.
It's great to be here. Really nice to see you.
So I guess if we could just start off talking a bit about what Axiom actually is and what on-demand legal services are.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's probably the best way to define my job is helping people in need of a certain type of legal services understand that, right? It's not as though sometimes we'll talk about companies, but Axiom works with a broad range of organizations. And so it could be a not-for-profit, it could be a charity, it could be government. But let's just sort of say like businesses, because that's sort of the main focus, and businesses broadly defined. But, tons of businesses across the globe know about Axiom. Equally, if not infinitely more, don't. And so the idea of on-demand legal services and what that means is something that I'm constantly thinking about. So, on my to-do list sitting in front of me, one of my big projects upcoming is how do I help a global food and beverage company that we've all heard of, we've all sampled their products, understand what on-demand legal services is, and how do I articulate that in a way that would be compelling via Zoom on a podcast or in a format that is going to get them to actually care. And so on-demand legal services, I think at the core, is about humans, right? And that distinguishes from legal technology and broader things. And so when I prepare for this presentation, I'll look at that food and beverages company's website and I'll look at their vision statement. And what their food and beverages, alcoholic beverages, is about is human connection. And so Axiom is about human connection, matching great people with other great people. I'm not being facetious. That's really at the core of what it is. How do you find a great person, right? And you could pick up, a textbook on, how to run a business, and pick like Good for Great, like the Jim Collins books out of Stanford, and they talk about ideas of, how do you organize a great company? Well, leadership and then people, right? And so a component of on-demand legal services is on-demand people, and so what does that mean? What is Axiom doing? Well, they're out there and, really drill down in it. We're out there finding, recruiting, screening, taking an opinion on a wide range of individuals in order to then turn around and find a range of opportunities. And so what does that mean? Find an opportunity, find a problem to solve, right? Work with the client to design way that you could use a human to solve another problem. And so what that looks like then is something akin, I think, to a marketplace of sorts, where you have a two-sided business model where Axiom makes what I characterize often to the market as investments, right? Axiom invests their time and resources to actively recruit lawyers that want to work in a variety of different ways, and similarly is actively engaged in the process of getting people to think about how you would use people. And so when it works, when I get off this call, I'll be speaking with a lawyer for an on-demand specific need in the US. And I'll be speaking right after that for a specific on-demand legal need in Canada. And so in both those cases, it's for the same global public company. One is a US government contracting. And so we've actively in advance identified somebody who's looking for an opportunity to do complex government contracting work. And we've also actively invested in looking for someone in Canada to do on-demand technology contract working. And so we are going to match those people up with another group of individuals to provide what I often characterize as, a much more dynamic response than anyone in legal tech can, because it's built by the best computer that evolution has ever made. And so Axiom fundamentally is a people company. And I hope that kind of gives you a sense of how we're, it's not perfect, but market making in a way.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that kind of prompts two immediate questions in my mind. Being a very people-centric company and having that recruitment and screening process be a key factor in Axiom's, success of matching and finding the right lawyers to provide that on-demand legal service. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what that recruitment process looks like and how you go about choosing lawyers that you believe are a great fit for the company, and then also the clients that you're servicing.
And so I often respond to that question by really zeroing in on the chief trait that makes somebody eligible for Axiom. It's really a desire. In some ways, it's two-part, but the governing trait is they have to want to work with us, right? And what it's sort of, maybe we can pause here to talk about how we differ from staffing agencies, how we're similar to, because those are important distinctions and they're things. So the goal of what we're trying to do is looking for people that could get a job elsewhere, right? We're not trying to find people full-time employment and then take a commission, which is typically a percentage of their revenue in that year. What we're trying to do is, and what's unique and novel about the model to a certain extent is, and it's been going, when I say to a certain extent, because Axiom's been around for 20 years, and the idea is, what if we provided a third option, not working full-time in the company or not working as a law firm service provider through that model? What if we provided something more like managed contracts, where you were working with Axiom as a team member, as an employee, right? And literally they're employees, the lawyers. And so, and what if you were placed on contracts, but not directed to go into them, but they were opportunities, right? And so you're at the same time, you're like a client if you're the lawyer. And so you're an employee / client, and clients typically command a certain amount of decision about who they do business with. And so that's really the key. We're looking for people that command attention, because they are interesting and good in the broadest sense of the words, interesting and good, like, interesting, just being dynamic individual that can contribute and, excels at teamwork, and good being someone who's done this before to success, right? Like those are the chief traits. And so we're not recruiting for a job, we're recruiting for a category and style. And the style is someone who wants to work this way, because we want to be able to have get on a phone with somebody in a format like this. Sadly, too much of it's done by Zoom now, and say, Susan or Mark, they choose to work with Axiom. And then the next part to that is Susan or Mark have worked at another food and beverage company, or have worked in a distribution of beverages company, so they understand something akin, just to bring it back to the other example. And so recruitment isn't, who wants a next job. It's more who wants a different path, and how does that potentially open up something that's attractive to the underlying client. And when I say underlying client, that would be it's a two-sided business model. So.
Right. No, I think that's it's a very interesting way of looking and structuring recruiting, especially for legal services, which traditionally have a fairly structured and I think different recruitment process for the traditional law firms. So this is definitely like a very innovative and unique way of looking at recruiting, and not so much as like a job, but more of a mentality for the lawyer.
A little bit about the style and the traits of the individuals that you're looking for that would fit within Axiom. But yeah. I'm curious, you're a lawyer. It sounds like there's a lot of recruiting in the job, not so much law. Like, what are the traits that make someone in your position successful?
Is someone in a position on the, let's go broadly, the business side of the Axiom? It's a good question. Again, interest and passion. These are the things that make a good podcast. It makes, for a good law lab, makes for a good student. Those are the things that help distinguish, how you do on the exams. I'm sure you have coming up, Eliana, like that extra level of engaging with the material. I think, I made the transition about 4 years ago away from the practice of law, and I was thinking about how that would work. And so my passion, my wife's a lawyer. I have lots of friends from U of T and from Osgoode, having grown up in Toronto, and from all of the law schools, but have deep personal relationships with people at all sorts of different roles. And I understand them and grew up with them. And like as an adult, I continue to growing up as I approach 40 this year. And, that passion, Josh, allows me to relate. And then when you couple that passion with having excelled in a difficult environment, so having done the work. Now, you don't have to have done the work like many of the people that do in my exact job have a management consulting background. Many of them have a very traditional sales background. Others have a completely different background altogether. But typically, it's the ability to what's defined my success is the ability to genuinely care about the individuals, to care about the underlying purpose of the work that's being done, and then to also build credibility through the experiences I had as a lawyer.
Yeah, it also, I think, goes to show how interchangeable some of these skills are that, we learn in school and in different professional or different professions, I guess, and how they can shift into other settings.
No, and I'd encourage, I reflect sometimes on, one of the things, it's a sales job, right? That an Axiom is a sales-driven organization that's owned. It's no secret. It's owned private equity. It's owned by one of the largest institutional investors in a massive global private equity company, and it's a profitable venture for them. And it's driven by a desire to raise money and by providing an excellent service. And the fundamental vision is to help great lawyers be even more successful. And so, to do something like that, though, it's not that different than the type of client service you're delivering at a law firm, and in terms of the way that they choose to do business with you, and there's a certain amount of customer service. And frankly, it's not that different from when I worked as a waiter in Toronto at Bar and Pub, and that would come up constantly when I got my first job at one of the firms, the Canadian national law firms, during the OCI process, OCI, it's been a while. OCIs, right? On-campus interviews. But it's probably a pretty tedious formal structure with little rooms as well that you have to go through. And some of those interviews went well and some of them didn't. But I'm drawing on all of those same things. And I think as I don't think we need to overcomplicate what makes a great lawyer. I listened to my wife in this COVID world upstairs practicing a very different type of law for a very successful firm, and great customer service, patience, listening, and understanding problems and understanding needs are going to be chapter 1 through 4 in any great business development book, or any great service delivery model book. Good engineers probably do something very similar, and so there's nothing unique about the law school experience that makes you successful in these roles. It's helpful that you had the head start on the industry. So I'd encourage everyone listening to anything like this to continue to venture out and do podcasts, think about things like Law Lab, pick up other side projects like some of the students at U of T have already met, because those skills coupled with the knowledge of the legal industry can help you start companies, work in traditional businesses like Axiom, or just be a better in-house lawyer, right? That speaks a variety of different languages around product design or health outcome delivery at a hospital, right? We work with all the big hospitals in Toronto.
Right. Yeah, no, that's definitely a good and poignant point for people to think about. And it's good to know that, a lot, I also, my first job was working, at a bar, greeting people at the front and then making sure they got a seat in enough time. And it's crazy how many times, that customer focus came up in the interviews I had with traditional law firms as well for the recruitment process, because it is some basic fundamentals that I don't think will ever go away. So
no, and as you seek to understand and contrast Axiom to other people, in its current iteration, which is the only one I've worked for it in, it's very much a people company. And there's been stages where it would use some of the capital it raised through revenue, or use some of the investments it raised to think about different categories like the ones you listed right at the outset, contract management, legal solutions, but it returned to a solely sort of human connection model. And that's sort of the iteration I've seen it in now and where it's going. And it's the simplicity and the focus of that, I think, has been a strength.
Yeah. And I know we've been talking a bit more about the focus of how, Axiom finds a match for the lawyers that it wants to bring on. I was wondering if we can, pivot a bit to thinking about how then you match those lawyers that you've deemed, the right fit for Axiom, and then decided to match those with the right clients and what factors you would consider. And if that's more of a human process, or if that's maybe where some of that technology comes in, and whether it's a more algorithm driven process. So if you could speak a bit to that.
Yeah, it's a really key question, and it's not one it's sort of an evolving one. I think it is. So just to give you guys in the audience some perspective, when I talk about my role, it's one of the things I do well is work as a member of a team. And so I contribute at an individual level, but there's many other versions of me. And so I'm on Slack right now. I've got a bunch of messages compiling here. I'm going to be on the phone with some colleagues. We're constantly working together. I'm flying to the Chicago office. So as a group, the whole host of different peoples who may be, leading recruitment, leading what we call talent engagement, which is fulfillment, leading a sales process, and then managing different aspects of that. Let's think of us as one, but clearly we have different areas of responsibility, some lawyer partnership, different ways to work with all sorts of, all the different aspects of the company. The business development and the sales team that is responsible for generating opportunities to provide great career next steps for the engaged Axiom lawyers. I mean, that's a specific role where you have responsibilities for that. And, I think at its core, it's quality. Like, can you get them to believe that you have quality lawyers? Like, because there isn't really a problem with demand for, like, think about just like your life. Like no one's like, oh, I wish I did that. Like, I have too many great people that solve problems. Like, I have too many people that know how to interesting. I have too many people that know how to deal with privacy law. Like, if you're you're like, oh my God, how are we going to deal with this privacy law issue, or this or that or the other? Or like, how are we going to wrap our hands around? And it's more simple, right? Like it's not that they don't understand that there is new waves of increasingly complex legislation. It's that how do they understand how to do that within the structure of a toothpaste company, or or of a supplements company, right? I was just at Shoppers Drug Mart today. You can't see it on the phone, and we're on a podcast, so people not watching. But think about it, right? Pick Shoppers Drug Mart. I had to go there to do my COVID antigen test. Think about all the different things they're buying and they're selling, and all the different ways they may or may not be tracking their average customer. And who is the person, and how can we get them to understand that we have somebody that worked at a non-competitive, non-conflicting, analogous environment that could introduce a level of expertise that could bolt on in a way and contribute in a way that's not exactly like what they can buy from a law firm, right? Like if you're counsel at Shoppers Drug Mart, I don't want to pick on one company, but it's just a good example of one that I was at today that we're not. If you're trying to, appreciate and understand all of the actual practical issues that go on in the delivery of a retail operation that also has a pharmacy, then you are quickly going to have to deal with questions that aren't really appropriate for sending to a law firm. And so to get specific, when I worked at Macmillan as a young lawyer, about 4 years into my career, I was seconded to Target Canada when it was here. And the types of questions I answered during that 4 to 5 month period were very different than the types of commercial questions that were sent to me as a lawyer in the law firm. And so what we're doing is getting on the phone and saying, hey, Target, hey, Shoppers Drug Mart, hey, pick the organization, hey, hospital, hey, Canadian government. Could you give us a little bit of your time? And if you give us a little bit of your time and information about the complexity that exists within your day-to-day. So, let's say University of Toronto, hey, University of Toronto lead lawyers, could you meet with me? Here's what I've been learning. I want to know more about what's hard about running a university in this COVID environment. And if you give me a little bit of information, I'm going to go out and think about whether or not there's anybody who could help with a problem like that. Invest time and money in making them available on demand if you ever decide to call back for them in the next few years. And if you can build that credibility and that type of response, people respond fairly well to that one, because they do like to talk. If you're polite and if you engage them and then you have something to contribute, they often want to talk about what's going on in their lives because it helps to work through it with other people. And two, because I think if you're genuine about and saying like, hey, when it's time, challenge me. And there always is a time. There's always a question that arises. How does a university deal with this? How does a retail pharmacy deal with that? This won't come across the border because of trade sanctions right now. So where do we figure out where the complexity is, identify the lawyers, and then react on demand? And so the hard part becomes getting the balance right. Do you make promises to too many lawyers across a range of industries in an area where you can't, pique enough interest from the, let's call them the buyers? And so that is the challenge to a model like this. And the selection process we would love to see it be dealt with by an algorithm, but that those aren't as easy as anyone would think. And so if you go online and look at the Axiom website, you'll see there's a talent platform where for the first time you're able to look at and see Axiom lawyers and see their availability. So that's the new venture. It's not sort of a retail consumption, it's more of an improved like customer consumption. So if you have a credible relationship with us and you are building and you want to pick yourself, which I think is the way the world is going to a certain degree, you can go that route with technology enabling the process of selecting. It's hugely powerful for large organizations that are trying to draw on a broad base of lawyers, but it's not there yet for all of the niche areas where we generate most of our revenue. And so it remains a people-driven process where we, people that understand what lawyers do and care deeply about it, act as an intermediary of sorts and provide a white glove service that I think is at risk somewhat of being replaced by technology. But personally, I'm happy if they try. Like, go for it, guys. Good luck. I could use the day off on it. Yeah.
Andrew, I want to tie back to something you said and also take a minute to shamelessly self-promote. So for anybody watching this, we were fortunate enough to have Andrew come in November, and he ran a session for us over lunch with a number of students talking about the importance of being able to collaborate with the business units and really get in the heads. And I think the one key takeaway for me with the firms that you were working with was how all of the general counsel were looking for individuals that really understood the industry or the business that they were in. So do you see that as a competitive advantage that Axiom brings, that your roster is large enough that you can have expertise, like very, very specific expertise in all of these industries to satisfy your clients?
Yeah, no, it's huge. I mean, maybe that's the best way is it probably what just, so where does Axiom stand versus competitors? They're just that much bigger. And so even though it's like a cohesive organization that's a company, it's not traditional in that sense. And so it's going to be broader than that, and sort of a company that sits at the middle of a really tight and then an also less tight network, because there's always going to be lawyers jumping in and out of Axiom. You might want to take a year off and then come back to Axiom. You might want to work here for 10 years straight. There's different reasons for that. And so because of the fluctuation in that, scale is the most important thing that we can sort of pull on. And so I'm shocked constantly by how I'm able to work with the core business team to fulfill the most random demands. And one of the ones I'm working on right now is for a specific jurisdiction that has a particular type of, I'm trying to, like my lawyer head, like, don't say anything confidential, like a specific type of, a very specific type of license for a for a highly emerging new business. And you're like, oh, there's never going to be anyone who does that. But there's no better place in the world to find the person who has done that. And sometimes that will be a law firm, right? Like there are certain skill sets that you wouldn't go to Axiom for, right? Like Axiom's not going to go to court or in a context of a business dispute or a criminal dispute, obviously. But there are random scenarios where you're like, hey, do you have anyone who's like lived in Shanghai and Toronto that's done like a little bit of financial payment service plans and a lot of cloud software, and like, do they speak like 4 languages? Like we're the place where we're like, oh yeah, we have 2. Do you want to meet them? Do you want to interview them tomorrow or the next day? And that only comes with scale. And that's, and so then markets, that place is like the markets. I sit in Toronto, obviously, and but I work across the globe. It's harder for me to do that in Canada. We have really great lawyers here, but we don't have as many. And there's many great regional competitors in Canada that have really strong offerings too. And so as a model for on-demand legal service, I'm always even encouraging my clients to think about like, hey, did you shop at our competitors? It's not a zero sum, this model. It's more, can we get them to think differently about working with a managed contractor who wants to be a managed contractor? It's so key to that asterisk. And we're going to win more than anyone just because of our size, right? You're getting up in near 8,000 lawyers globally right now, right?
Eliana, I don't want to take us off track, and let me know if I do, but I'm interested there because we've talked a lot about like how scaled up Axiom is, how you've been in existence for 20 years at this point, and pretty stable market size, I would say. What does this mean for competitors coming into the space as other ALSPs? Like, are the barriers to entry just that high that they're never really going to be competition?
Like, I can't say anything with certainty. I mean, I think if you look at, and I'd encourage everyone that listens to this to just pop on and look at sort of Access Legal Talent to see some examples of the type of lawyers that work here, and to focus on perhaps maybe the US jurisdiction, because that's where the depth really continues to lie. We have Asia operation, UK operation, Canada, but the depth is really in the US, and the power that makes us have the wide moat is in the US. I don't know, Josh. I really don't. I think, you've got to be concerned if you own a company like this, or if you work at a company like this, about a really focused software algorithm driven process. We're trying to build one. Everyone's trying to think about that, like, which removes a portion of the costs associated with the white glove service. I mean, if someone was able to figure that out, or to enable something akin to a sophisticated classifieds, that could be existential for any type of business. But having worked in this particular model, being one of the people that works tirelessly on the white glove side, I'm not too concerned just yet about it. And so I think it probably does require a ton of investment, like a ton of investment on the recruiting side, a ton of capital. There's no doubt there will be successful businesses that are already in businesses like this that are much larger than Axiom, that may want to build a legal division that already have a framework, and you'll see that, of course. And so, yes, they've got major competitive advantage, but I don't know that anyone's resting or knows where the true threat is coming from.
Right. It also does sound like, based on, the selection and recruitment process you were talking about, that getting the lawyer buy-in and getting good lawyers also, lends an edge to Axiom, just because getting a good talent pool to make sure that that service delivery is of like the highest quality could, still be a challenge for anyone, even with the technological infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a great point, in the sense of that's incredibly difficult to do. Yeah, no, it's very difficult to hire, and it's very difficult sometimes to match an Axiom lawyer with a client. And sometimes it doesn't work out, in the sense of like there's just a disconnect, or the skills don't match. Or sometimes the lawyer starts and it doesn't work out, or the lawyer's not happy with the client, or vice versa, right? And so, and having been relatively, it's my second year working with this particular organization and have had a lot of success. There are the times where I'm surprised when something goes wrong that the client's not more mad at me. And one of the things I've realized is that, like, finding great people is just really hard, right? And great people, and again, it's hard, right? Because it's not good or bad people. It's people excelling in that particular role and being enabled, right? Like, you could use a sports analogy. The right player on the right team under the right coach is more what we're talking about, as opposed to the self-worth of that individual. And so it is really, really hard to build teams, successful teams. It's really hard to collaborate on a group project at school. It does not get easier as you go. And so finding and enabling the right mix of talent is pretty much the full-time job of any successful manager, and the job of any successful GC. And I think we work really hard at that, and aren't a lot of algorithms that can solve for that. I mean, there are processes like the ones the Ray Dalio of the world talks about in his famous books, where they used cards and they ranked personality types at Bridgewater, these big investment companies that are some of the biggest, most successful companies in the world. And I think about that type of all sorts of measures of what makes a lawyer. Like, is there going to be a place where we have, a like where we're assessing employees' skill sets using an algorithmic model? I don't know that we're there. I haven't seen anything in that regard. We don't run on instinct. We run on classic practices of, eliminating discrimination, eliminating bias as much as possible, objective processes that are probably akin to any good hiring department. And we're facilitating, let them get in front of each other directly as soon as possible and make the decision on their own ability. So yeah, no, it's a decidedly low tech business in many ways, because the letting the talent shine is oftentimes the best way to do it.
Right. And yeah. I do have one more question, just because you've touched on it a few points or a few times, and it's how the work may differ from what you would hire a traditional law firm to do. And in that, I was thinking, how has the response to specifically on demand legal service providers like Axiom been from traditional law firms? Because in other areas of ALSPs, like the contract review and e-discovery, law firms now love it because it helps them provide their service more effectively and more efficiently. So does that differ for this specific category of ALSPs? And do you see that, changing at all now and in the future?
And correct me if I didn't understand the question, or there's different parts to it, or if I go off on another tangent, but it is useful. It's a very good question, because it's useful to understand Axiom as a place that you wouldn't go to for e-discovery support. It's not to say that there wouldn't be some odd exception to the rule where we would work on a high volume, low value type of an exercise. We're not that. We're more quality senior expertise at a price that is fairly significant. We're not the low cost option for high volume work. We're the clone the best member of your team overnight group. And so they like, does that answer the question? Like,
I guess what would a company like Axiom's relationship be with the more traditional law firm?
Gotcha.
In that, do you work alongside, lawyers from or partners specifically like from these law firms, or is it more so a competitor to that?
I'd say that it's clearly both, and it's difficult to generalize. And so if we grant that, and there are lots of different economic models. Let's stick to Canada for a second. And if we think about how firms in Halifax and firms in Manitoba, Manitoba, certain areas of Alberta have had to reframe themselves in order to provide an offering that services a range of customers at a lower rate because of their cost center. You've seen sort of nearshoring at large Canadian firms that are located in the big city centers using different associates. Those have been trends that have emerging. And so there's no doubt that at some level, everybody is competing for dollars. And so that's granted. But I think the idea, and budgets are finite, right? Like legal, there's still a cost center mentality in terms of what GC, a CLO, is intended to spend. And so the CLO I'm dealing with later today is going to be always thinking about how much money I'm spending this month on my law firms and how much money I'm spending on Axiom. And it would be unfair to think that they are not connected at a level that influences competitiveness. In the same way, they're constantly thinking, hey, should I hire more people? What's the true cost of hiring more people? And how would that allow me to pull some of the work away from the law firm? But there are also very good reasons why you have full-time employees. You have a contingent labor force provided potentially by a partner like Axiom, or through your own, you're free to go contract with people independently, or you could be a competitor, or to use your law firm. There are things and types of work that just lend themselves well to having it outside of your organization. And then there are ways where, when that CLO called me to discuss this opportunity for a particular type of license, he's saying, I have all the money I need for external counsel, but it's not the same. Those are his words. We want somebody who can be close to the business, learn the business. And so, you can get closer when you bring somebody in-house, but not every time do you want that person to be a full-time employee, because back to the privacy, topic we talked about, it's always going to be an area. You may not need to do a full detailed privacy overhaul every year, but you may decide that the nature of your business is to bring somebody in for a license application or a privacy overhaul application and have them in there. And so the law firms could be direct competitors in the sense that they do paid secondments. And that's not unlike what Axiom's offering, right? Like we're selling secondments. And so where we're all in it together. And on my most successful projects right now, there'll be the largest Canadian law firm, there'll be some full-time employees, and there'll be some Axiom lawyers. Invariably, every big organization, from a hospital to a for-profit business, is going to use a mixture. And I would love it if an increasing amount of organizations pulled a few more 100,000 at a time and started spending it on Axiom, right? And so we're whittling away at an overall budget with a view to trying to connect our people with risk mitigation and profit-driven activities, right? And so if we're, talking about having an Axiom lawyer go into a company, what if they could help that company understand how to be more responsive? And then as a result, build excess capacity during the busy quarter at the end of the year when that company recognizes sales revenue. And so by doing a paid secondment, as opposed to getting overwhelmed and sending it out to a firm, just because that was your only choice there, or just not doing the work altogether and having a bottleneck, if we could say, hey, add an Axiom lawyer for 3 months in Q3, this lawyer really wants some tech experience. That's why they're here. They want to do some technology agreements. They've come here. They want to work. They're great. Bring that person in and then increase your capacity. Then it's a win-win-win for the business team, the in-house CLO, and then Axiom. And the law firm is still going to remain involved, and the lawyers are still all, some of those lawyers will go back to work at law firms. And some of our lawyers will poach them and vice versa. So the ecosystem supports each other, and the service delivery model is just more connected with where should you be sitting in a notional sense.
Right. No, I think that, gives some interesting things to think about, and how law firms and these different ALSPs can, complement each other in their services and work together. And then in what ways are they competing more so for the clients and specific services. So very interesting to think about.
And pick Andrew's brain. Like, I know you mentioned, Andrew, that you don't really, other law firms don't necessarily have to be competitors, but technology is potentially a threat coming. What are the biggest threats to ALSPs and companies like Axiom? And do you see this evolving in the near future?
I think like this year is very different than last year in terms of the ability for people, like the wage inflation that exists, that affects all employers, will affect expectations around a contingent like workforce as well. And so global trends in terms of hiring and not hiring are felt probably more like we're more sensitive to, because we're hiring so many lawyers all the time and they aren't as deeply ingrained in a long-term plan with us. Anything that would suggest that there was more movement in the market for opportunities for lawyer makes our job harder, right? We're not in the business of making the same margins as law firms on, we would like a healthy margin that's appropriate for the add-on service that we're providing, right? And so if you think about that, Eliana, if you were a lawyer that Axiom is recruiting, you're doing that because you're saying, hey, I want Andrew and the other hundreds of people like him at Axiom to provide me a service as a client, as a lawyer. So I'm going to outsource the business development to Axiom. If you're feeling like you can command a particular salary, I guarantee this year, every young lawyer thinks they can command more money than they did last year. That may be a disconnect with what the client's willing to pay, Josh. And so, in wage inflation, cost pressure, expectations around clients, availability of talent is always felt very acutely, right? So demand will always outpace supply to a certain degree. And so anytime when there's a supply shortage for, like, good luck, go find a fifth-year tech lawyer in Toronto right now with product and software experience, right? Like, everybody will hire that person. And so, every big company that you can think of that has a product in your room right now, the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples, are going to take every product and software lawyer that really knows what they're doing, whether it's a full-time employee, whether it's through a law firm, or whether it's through Axiom. And so talent shortages in areas that are critical, and combined with wage inflation, combined with market dynamics, and mixed with advantages that we might have through a remote world or back to the office. Like, if everyone goes back to the office, we're not able to be as dynamic in fulfillment. And so big changes around those type of things, I think, are more concerning for a business like this right now, as opposed to a specific threat coming from a new entrant that had a type of software, to software defined broadly, or like a platform, or a new company that was just fully funded and was trying to do the same thing. I mean, I think the market has a lot of room to grow, right? The pie that's the revenue, like, the law firms are making all the money still. And so the growth is still there. It's just a question of whether the model works in order to excite lawyers. Like, maybe that's a good place to end it. Like, why, if we're not attracting people that want to come here, like genuinely want to come here to succeed, then we fail. And being able to provide them with opportunities that they want to come here is not something that's super, like, it's not just automatic. And so it requires access to great work and interesting places with good people, but it also requires the right economics. And so those dynamics, I think, are playing out across the world right now. I don't know, Josh, you know more about millennials than me, so let's turn it over to Eliana to figure out how we continue to build out our millennial network as we continue to keep the pace of growth that we'd like to.
That supply is demand is greater than supply should hopefully bring some comfort to law students and young lawyers, and knowing that they will find jobs if they're looking and eager to, and that it's really about finding a skill set that you're like passionate about and diving into that area so that you can find the opportunity, but that those opportunities do exist and it's not something we have to worry about as much as maybe we're led on to believe.
No,
I wonder if,
yeah, please.
I was gonna say, I wonder if that's like the biggest opportunity that Axiom and just in general alternative legal service providers offer to millennials, individuals that don't always have the greatest attention span. Maybe it is that flexibility. It's the opportunity to work on a whole bunch of different projects at once and acquire expertise in a variety of areas that is going to be, highly leverageable skills later on.
Yeah, I think I'd be the first to tell a young lawyer, and I've built relationships with some U of T students that have come through the program. I mean, it's not, Axiom by its definition isn't a place to go get training, because what we're selling is people that want to work here that have experience. So typically we're not step one, but there are exceptions. That's not the model, right? Like most people have already taken one step because that's what they're deciding to sell back in a different environment to another person. And so it's an important distinction. And so it's great but the reality, and some of it's positive, some of it's negative, is that we're moving to a more contract focused world with shorter timeframes. And, there's influences across gig. And so you have to be comfortable in that environment. And like where you have to take risks as a young lawyer, as a young person, as a person of any age, to seize on interesting opportunities, even if they're short term, if they come with something that builds your resume, and something that builds your resume, not just from an optical level, but true underlying skills. And so I've had success in my role at Axiom because I foster actual personal relationships with young lawyers and have them fit into roles that I know are dynamic and that are harder to fill because of the economics of the role. So maybe there's like a price cap on the day rate that somebody's willing to pay. And so Axiom can't do that if it's going to lose them money. And there's a point where Axiom doesn't make any money. And so, right. And so that's just the business of any service provider, right? Where's the margin that you need for it to be profitable? And so, that's a fun and interesting way for us to think, hey, where does Axiom, when I meet with a large organization, where are some places where you could use not a specific skill set, but you could use the skill set that a fresh young lawyer has, which is a specific skill set. And I call that dynamic aspect, right? Like, do you need a dynamic young person that could learn a portfolio of contracts? I'm thinking of a specific project where they had a bundle of complex arrangements that, you're not just going to give that job to everyone. It's perfectly suited for somebody who has the analytical ability that came out of law school. And so a bright, young, ambitious lawyer who wants to maybe wanted a full-time job, their dream job, but hasn't found it yet, can seize on an Axiom to do a contract in a way that's not e-discovery. Not that there's anything wrong with e-discovery. These same people probably did a year of e-discovery at another provider, and they can do something more team focused, more individual, more human at Axiom. And then perhaps they do 1 year at a law firm, and then they start to look very attractive, right? And then we're losing them to the technology group at this X law firm, or we're losing them to X company in a full-time role, and we're not generating any revenue. And so do think about Axiom as one place where you can, it's one of many ways that you can access and show off what you can do. And it's just one of many.
Great. Well, I mean, I think I've exhausted most of my questions, and I think it's provided a very, very good overview of, what ALSPs exist, and specifically how on-demand legal services work and how they're being used, and specifically how Axiom is, going about being a leader in the space. So it's great to hear more about that, and hopefully people listening will take a few key points away from this, both in terms of ALSPs and also maybe some food for thought for how they want to see their future careers progress as, lawyers or business people or consultants and whatever they're interested in.
Yeah, no, I'd end just by saying, yeah, don't overcomplicate it. Don't think of Axiom as sort of something in a box that's completely unique. It's a group of individuals, many of which are lawyers on all sides of the business. Clearly, the underlying lawyers are there. Other lawyers work in management roles, in service delivery roles, in back office programming roles to work on some of the tech development that we're trying to build to deal with these questions. But all of us share very simple things, which is like teamwork, collaboration, and more of those two things. Just teamwork, collaboration, contributing, hard work. That's really what Axiom is. And so anything you can do to flex those muscles in your careers and demonstrate that you have both the analytical ability and the ability to collaborate, you'll do very well.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us today and for being a friend of the Future of Law Lab in the University of Toronto all year. And thank you, Eliana, for coordinating this entire research working group that we had on ALSPs and for the tireless work that you've put into helping with the drafting, the editing, and conducting this entire interview pretty much on your own. So thank you to both of you. I really appreciate it.